In this movie, we're going to be talking about null. Null is a fancy term for nothing, for not having a value. It's not zero, it's not an empty string, it's the actual lack of a value. I mean, if we can set a value into a variable, then we also have to have some way to talk about the fact that that variable might not have a value at all. And null allows us to do that. Let's take a look at it by first creating a page where we can work with null. And I'm going to do that by opening up basic.html and then choosing Save As. We're going to save this as null.php. So null. Now, like true and false, the booleans that we just talked about, null can either be written in lowercase or in all uppercase. And you will waste a lot of time arguing with people about the right way to do it in PHP and whether one is better than the other or one has better performance than the other. But the truth is that they're case insensitive and that you can use absolutely whichever one you prefer. There is no difference. I'm going to use the lowercase version. Now let's set a variable equal to var1 equal to null. And just for contrast, let's set var2 equal to an empty string, just so that we can see the difference between those two. Now, like a lot of the other types that we've looked at, there are functions that allow us to test whether it is of a certain type. So we can test whether this is null or not. Is_null will tell us if the variable is null. And we'll do that to both of these. Let's also do it to a third one as well. Make this var3, and we'll test var3. Now var3 isn't set, right? It hasn't been set to anything. So we'll see what that gives us back. Switch over to Firefox, and instead of booleans, we'll load up null.php. So it came back and said, is variable 1 null? Yes, it is. Variable 2, is that null? No, it's not. That was my empty string, so that's not considered null. var3, is it null? I get a notice here. That's not an error. That's not a warning. It's a notice just saying, hey, little heads up here. You're in the middle of developing, and I noticed that you're making a reference to an undefined variable. So I want to call your attention to it here. Notices are different than warnings in PHP. But it goes ahead after that notice and gives us the result, which is that yes, in fact, var3 is null. The fact that it hasn't been set means that it has no value. So the answer is true. It is null. So notice the difference between that. Notice what happened with var1 and what happened with var3. By setting it specifically to null, I avoid this notice that pops up. And we can contrast that with what happens if we have is set, right? So let me just paste in a few others here. var1 is set, var2 is set, or var3 is set. Is set doesn't have a space here, no underscore between is set. It's all run together. And let's just reload the page now. And you can see that it tells us that variable 1 is not set, variable 3 is not set, and variable 2 is set. Now, not set means that it's null, right? So being null, we're being told it's the same thing as being unset. Now, we know it's not exactly the same thing. We saw that with is null, but it's close. For the purposes of most of our tests, it will be the same. So that's what null is. Null is just the lack of having a value. That's a pretty easy concept. But I think this is also a good spot for us to talk about a function in PHP called empty. And as you'd expect, empty returns a Boolean, true or false, for whether a variable is considered to be empty. What you might not expect, though, are the things that it considers to be empty. In PHP, empty is going to be an empty string, null, 0, 0.0, meaning a float in which the value is 0, a string with a 0 inside of it, false, or an empty array. All of those things are considered empty. So we can provide our tests again here for whether these things are considered empty. Let's define var3 here, just so it has a value. var3, oops, need my $sign in front. var3 is going to be equal to, and let's make it 0 inside the string like that. Let's go back over to our browser and let's try those out. Let's see what things are empty. Is var1 empty? Yes. var2 empty? Yes. var3 is empty also. So null, an empty string, and, this is a very important one, 0 inside the string are all considered to be empty. Now, this broad catch-all approach can be extremely useful, but you have to use it with a lot of caution. For example, imagine that you had a web form that was submitting a value to your PHP code. And imagine that that field was, how many children do you have? You want to check if that field is left blank by the user. And if not, you want to say, hey, you need to fill out this. I need to know how many children you have. Empty would detect an empty string or no value being submitted, which is what you want. But it would also not allow the number of children you have to be 0 as a value, which is probably not what you intended, right? They would not be able to submit the value 0. Just like we saw here, that would be considered empty as well. So most times you'll need to use further conditions with empty, such as is it empty and also not numeric, or is it empty but not null. Now I'm mentioning this now because empty is a leading cause of bugs in PHP code. So it's something that you're really going to want to keep an eye out for.